getting them in trouble over the last few decades, because vultures are now some of the most threatened of all birds, and of course the main reasons they're so threatened are the people I blame for it are farmers and poachers. Of course, farmers use a veterinary drug on their cattle, and I can't remember the name of it, but of course, when the cows die, the farmers leave the carcass out for the vultures, and the vultures consume the carcass with the drug. It builds up in their system, and then eventually it kills them. But the worst is poachers, because poachers quite often kill vultures because they give away their positions to park rangers and the anti-poaching squads. I mean, they either shoot them or, even worse, poison them. And because poisoning is worse, because vultures only have one chick every 2 years, and they always bring food back to their nest, and of course they quite often bring poisoned meat back to their chicks, and then that's 2 generations of vulture wiped out just like that. And a few years ago it was even worse in Asia, but now it's even much worse in Africa, and these birds have been lost in about 90 to 95% of their range. And without these animals around, carcasses are just going to build up everywhere in the bush, and they're going to spread diseases that will not just affect not just affect wildlife, but also affect the humans. And of course, also, while there aren't many people who share my opinion about vultures, that means there aren't a lot of people who want to do anything to look after them, because they aren't everyone's idea of a nice looking animal, but to me they are some of the most beautiful and some of the most extremely important of all creatures. And now, the next animal I'm going to show you all is one of our closest relatives. It is the mountain gorilla. Now, gorillas are the largest of all primates, which is the same group that human beings are a part of. And of course, mountain gorillas are found in the mountainous cloud forests of Rwanda, Uganda, and the Congo. And it was only about just over 100 years ago, around the Victorian era, that the first European outsiders came to the forests of Rwanda or Uganda, and they saw mountain gorillas for the first time. And of course they brought back stories of these terrifying beasts that are incredibly strong and can rip a man apart with their bare hands. That of course is what inspired the stories of Tarzan and King Kong. Of course, we've learned a lot more about mountain gorillas since then. We know they're actually herbivores, which are animals that feed on vegetable matter, and they are generally peaceful creatures, and are only aggressive when they're defending themselves, or more importantly, their family. And as you can probably see here, while a fully grown male silverback gorilla would probably be no taller than me, he would be at least 2 times my weight and a lot more muscular. Of course, unfortunately, nowadays, the mighty silverbacks are not just putting their lives on the line to fight off leopards, crocodiles, and even chimps. Today, they are now facing human foes, and the strength of the silverback is unable to fight off the poacher's bullets. And of course, the hunting of gorillas is illegal throughout their range, but the poaching of gorillas has meant that there's probably no more than 700 to probably just 1,000 mountain gorillas left in the wild. And of course, the reasons for that is they are hunted for sport, but also they are hunted for the bushmeat trade and for their body parts to be sold as ornaments, or even worse, young gorillas quite often are taken from the wild to be sold as exotic pets to disreputable zoos, or for tourists to have their photos taken with, or even worse, to be sent to labs to be experimented on. And of course, that is is not the only threat that gorillas are facing, but also habitat loss, thanks to humans, but also, like human beings, gorillas are also susceptible to the deadly Ebola virus, and it's believed that that disease has wiped out a third of the gorilla population in the last 30 years. And of course, we've tried keeping mountain gorillas in captivity to breed them, but unfortunately that has been disastrous because mountain gorillas can be very stressful animals and they need very specific habitat. So there are people working to protect mountain gorillas in the wild, like with teams of vets on call 24/7, armed patrols and anti-poaching squads monitoring them, but also making money from gorillas with tourism, tracking them down with cameras rather than guns and snares. Of course, in Rwanda and Uganda, that has actually helped the gorilla population in those parts of the world increase. But in the Democratic Republic of Congo, tourism is still, a lot of the time, a no-go because there is still civil war going on. And of course, one rule they always have when you go and see gorillas is because gorillas are so closely related to us humans, they're also susceptible to our diseases. So you have to wear a face mask at all time because even a simple cold could prove fatal to a mighty silverback. So it's always wise to wear face masks when you're looking at these animals. Now, the next creature is probably the most threatened member of the dog family. It is the Ethiopian or Abyssinian wolf. Now, these animals are found in Ethiopia, hence the name, where they are endemic, which means they're found there and nowhere else on Earth. Of course, the Ethiopian wolf is a very different creature to its grey wolf cousin. And for one thing, the muzzle is a lot longer and thinner because it can get into cracks and crevices. The teeth are smaller and more spread out than they are a grey wolf. But also, Ethiopian wolves, although they do live in packs, they don't hunt together, they hunt on their own. Because where they live in places like the Bale Mountains, there's nothing up there as big as an elk, a moose or a bison that needs to be brought down by the whole pack working together. A lot of what they feed on is rodents like giant mole rats. But, unfortunately, these animals over the last few decades have been under tremendous pressure. Over recent years, they've suffered from hunting, habitat loss, and most recently, from disease, which has meant that there's probably less than 500 Ethiopian wolves left in the wild, so they are teetering on the edge. The main reason these wolves are so rare, well, one of the main reasons was a few years ago they were blamed for livestock predation and were persecuted by people, but that has since been stopped because it was proven that the Ethiopian wolves were not responsible. But the main reason these wolves are so rare is habitat loss, because Ethiopia's human population has been expanding at a rapid rate. And now, all those people now need more space to live and to grow their food. And as they take up the land for farming, that's leaving less and less space for the wolves to live and raise their pups. And it's now pushing all of them into the highest mountain ranges of Ethiopia. But, unfortunately, these wolves have not just been threatened by hunting and the loss of their habitat. In fact, because people in Ethiopia, like many people around the world, keep dogs, and unfortunately, pet dogs in Ethiopia have one of the highest rates of rabies in the world, a disease that affects all members of the canine family and unfortunately is fatal. And the wolves easily catch rabies when they come into contact with pets or stray dogs. But also, stray dogs have even been interbreeding with Ethiopian wolves, which is kind of mixing the genes a little and is causing a few health issues. But there is hope. Like, there's vaccinations being given to the local dogs to prevent the spread of rabies to the Ethiopian wolves, and also efforts are gradually being made to preserve the habitat they live in, but also conservationists are telling the local people that they need to coexist with the animals, otherwise they will cause trouble for the wolves, and they'll be in a lot more trouble. And so hopefully in 40 years' time, this species could increase from 35 to 40, from 500 to probably a few thousand. And now the next animals I'm going to show you all are probably our closest living relatives. They are the chimpanzees. Now, chimpanzees are found in the jungles and forests of Central and Western Africa. They live in family groups of about 30 to 40 animals, but the biggest group ever recorded was 150 animals in the Ngorongoro National Park in Uganda. Of course, chimpanzees have big brains, so they are intelligent, but also chimps are tool users, because they've been seen for many years now using tools to get food, like they've been seen using sticks to fish ants and termites out of their nests. They use rocks and logs to crack open tough forest nuts. But also, they've even been seen using the buttress roots of a tree to crack open the shell of a tortoise. And of course, what many people don't know is chimps don't just eat fruit. In fact, less than half of a chimp's diet is made up of fruit. What they actually feed on a lot of the time is monkeys, bush pigs, small antelope, and even occasionally rival chimps, so they can be cannibalistic. And it's actually believed that we share between 98 to 99% of our DNA with these animals. And in fact, Charles Darwin, who was the greatest naturalist and biologist who's ever lived, because he based a lot of his theories on evolution from his studying of chimpanzees in Africa. Of course, that was one of the things that caused him to question his own Christianity and the existence of God, was the idea that we evolved from chimps. Darwin was a religious man, but that was one of the things that caused him to question his own Christianity. And of course, this being our closest cousin, it's now even more of a tragedy that they are at risk because of us. Chimpanzees are now classed as endangered, and there are many reasons for that. The first one is the Ebola virus, which has been not only wiped out a third of the gorilla population, but also a third of the chimp population. The second is habitat loss, because we are taking away the forests they rely on, cutting and burning them down to make way for plantations, farms and towns. But there are even more sinister reasons why chimpanzees are at risk because of us. And of course, one of those is the trade in bushmeat. While much of the trade is legal, hunters have also been stealing chimpanzees, which is not, because adult chimps are killed so that their meat can be taken to markets and then sold as food, which isn't just harmful to the chimps, but it's also dangerous to people, because many life-threatening diseases can pass between us. But, in my opinion, people who actually do catch diseases from the chimpanzee meat, they get very little sympathy from me, because they brought it upon themselves with killing chimps for their meat and trying to sell it to other people. But the worst is the pet trade, because chimpanzees, young chimps, quite often when their parents are killed, they are stolen from the wild to be sold as exotic pets to disreputable zoos, to labs to be experimented on, or even more cruel for tourists